Testing 1, 2, 3. Man of the hour is Terry Pecci. That's my testing. I understand somebody messed up my clock in the foyer, that was set so far ahead. Messed it all up. Well, that's okay. Now people are going to be late, though. See, that's the tragedy. Well, get your Bibles out. Let's go over to Joshua chapter 13 tonight. Got a lot of chapters to cover. One of our bigger jumps in the book of Joshua. I think next week we're only going to cover one chapter, and then after that we cover a chapter or two together as we kind of get ready to finish up. Let's kind of remember where we've been and what's been going on in our study in Joshua. We're kind of winding down with the conquest, but that's not exactly true, right? Because we're going to end this book, and in some ways we're going to say the conquest really didn't get fulfilled, or more to speak, the Israelites didn't fulfill their part. Next time we're going to talk about a really important verse that's going to tell us that God accomplished everything that he intended to do, and that's something that we want to consider as being a real important promise that the book of Joshua gives us. But the point is that chapter 13 begins with Joshua old and advanced in years, is how it describes him. Now, before this, as they moved in the last couple of weeks, I wish I could have been here with you on those classes. The Gibeonites, what did the Gibeonites do again? Remind me of that one. What was their story? They lied, they deceived, they set themselves up. Now, Anthony, you were the one that covered that one, right? Or no, it wasn't? Oh, it was, okay. Well, one thing I think about the Gibeonites that's interesting is, there's certainly nothing to say was good about what they did, but there was a group of people that really wanted to be on the right side of things. They saw where it was going, so there's something to consider there. And certainly even their punishment to be the servants of Israel, to be the servants of the tabernacle, well, that's not really a terrible punishment. So, I've always thought that's an interesting story. We saw, though, that how the Gibeonites then become the catalyst to kind of get the conquest all wrapped up in one big battle. If you were making a movie about this or writing a book about it, this would have been, the place where you say is the pinnacle fight. Because what happens is those other kings in the area decide, hey, did you see what the Gibeonites did? They made peace with the Israelites, and we kind of presume maybe their thinking is, if everybody's making peace, we won't last. So they gang up on the Gibeonites, and it kind of draws out all of these Canaanite cities and draws out their armies. And I can't help but to see maybe a divine hand in this, in the sense that the Israelites had to go from city to city to city, besieging them, and maybe sometimes God would work like with Jericho, but other times like Ai he didn't. That they might have a much longer period, but to bring all those armies out of the cities, all those armies to come together and engage them in a battle where they could then win, really makes this conquest just a matter of cleaning up afterwards, of just going to the cities and finishing them off because the armies have been done in. Quick question, how many kings total did Joshua overcome? 31. Yeah, very last verse, chapter 12, says 31 kings total. Bringing us now to chapter 13. Before we get started into chapter 13 tonight, let's go to our Father in a word of prayer. Would you pray with me? Holy God and Father in heaven, we come before you in prayer, giving thanks to you for 10,000 blessings that we are given. Constantly, Father, reminded of your grace and your mercy in our lives and around us. We're so very grateful to have a few minutes of time to come together, to see each other tonight, Father, to be with one another, to encourage each other, and to study your word. And we pray, Father, as we consider your word tonight, how you fulfill promises and how you have expectations of us, that, Father, we'll understand that these things were written for our admonition and learning, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Be with us as we study tonight, and be with us through the remainder of this week. And in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. So chapter 13, as I said a moment ago, begins with Joshua advanced in years. Then God says to him, you're advanced in years, and there remains very much land yet to be possessed. And verse 2 goes on to describe some of that land, the Philistines, the Geshurites, the Gazites, the Ashdodites, these are the Philistines, some of the Canaanites, all the way up to the Sidonians. It's kind of interesting, by the way, a few of these places weren't part of that original list of the 7 nations that God would dispossess. like the Philistines or the Sidonians, the Phoenicians. They're brought in here as well and given some of that sense of they're a part of that land that's going to be taken out. God is saying, I'll drive them out before the children, but we need to divide up the land. We need to divide up the land. And it's kind of an interesting thing because what you're doing is you're making the borders of these places official. Now, what might have happened if they weren't official? Can you kind of think to yourself or look and think about what could have happened if they hadn't kind of stipulated what the borders of the lands would be? There's a tribe like Manasseh, which is really big. What's going to happen, Rob?
They might start fighting amongst themselves.
Absolutely. We don't want to see a situation where we have 12 nations fighting against each other, and there's going to be some fighting against each other. We're going to have a lot of wars between each other for the next 500-600 years. But the point is that probably the biggest thing is you don't want people fighting against each other over land, over territory and things like that. So that's a really good point. So the land's going to be divided up in a very official way. Ryan?
Thousands of dollars to make this very long fence. It's over a foot.
I remember many years ago on our farm, the state came out and resurveyed our farm, and our well for our orchard sat in the corner, and they surveyed the well off into the neighbor's land. And oh, what a mess. It took a year to get that straightened out, to get it all sorted out. And what finally had to happen was our neighbor, he was a nice guy. He said, I'm just going to deed it over to you, since the state kept saying, no, we can't be wrong. So that was quite the experience there. So you can see a lot. Stephen Root throws out the idea in fighting. That's it. You know, like I said, to divvy out this land, particularly that God has said, Joshua, you're old, intent, we need to do this now. You know, and I find it kind of interesting, you know, that you can kind of have conversations with people where there's the patriarch of some family, and they say, you know, before you're gone, you need to tell us where things need to be going and how important a conversation like that might be. So they've already split off some of the land. Of course, we know some of the land has been taken, but there's a lot of land that has not been taken. Now, as we go through this story here, and we read about how God, through Moses, had given the Reubenites and the Gadites some of the land already on the other side. They had conquered that before they even entered the land. That with all this land, that's going to get brought up a couple of times, reminding them that some of the land has been conquered already. But one of the things he also wants us to know is that there was the tribe of Levi, and the tribe of Levi gets what? What do they get? They get cities. And by the way, they get communal land around the cities, but they don't actually get an inheritance. What does it always say when it talks about their inheritance? Maybe you said it. The Lord. Their inheritance was the Lord. That's what it repeatedly tells us. So it's kind of an important point about this. One of the things I think is kind of interesting is that one of the things that when dividing this land up in chapter 15, you're going to see it too, is that it's going to require some of the priest authority as well. Eleazar is going to have to be involved in this too, and he's going to have to bring this up. So chapter 13 introduces us to this idea. Chapter 14 continues telling us how the land is being broken up. Eleazar the priest, Joshua, the heads of the family, so everybody's come together. And it says that they're all driving this out by lot. Let me ask real quick, what does it mean when it says by lot? Anybody know? What does it mean when it says that they were dividing it up by lot?
Actually, it's like we might pick a name out of a hat.
Okay, so the term sometimes gets used as casting lots. So it's not the idea that like a lot of property, you know, lot 12, lot 13. What it's more like is it's a selection process. We'll come back to this in a second. I like your analogy though, like drawing names out of a hat is kind of how they're pulling all this together. I want us to kind of think about this for a moment. Of course, again, it identifies that the Levites aren't going to get a part of this. I want to begin reading though here in chapter 14 and verse 6. So come along with me there, Joshua chapter 14, verse 6. The children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, Let me just ask you a real quick question. The people of Judah come and Caleb comes. What's the connection there? It's easy. Caleb he's of the tribe of Judah. Now, what tribe is Joshua from? Ephraim. That'll come important here a little further on when the Ephraimites are going to come to Joshua about some concerns that they have, and that's kind of an interesting thing for us to think about too. But Caleb comes, the people of Judah come, and here's Caleb's words. You know the word which the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. So Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land where your foot is trodden shall be your inheritance, and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. And now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now here I am this day, 85 years old. Yet I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in. Now therefore, give me this mountain, of which the Lord spoke in that day. For you heard in that day how the Anakim were there, and that the cities were great and fortified. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said. And Joshua blessed him, and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as an inheritance. Hebron therefore became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. A name of Hebron formerly was Kirjath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. So this is kind of an interesting thing, and we're going to touch base here in the next chapter a little more about this. First and foremost, it's kind of interesting when you go back to Numbers that when God had said, you remember the story, they're the two spies that came back, and I can't help but to love the story. Everybody saw the same land, they saw the same things. 10 of them said, can't do it. Joshua and Caleb said, no. This, with God, we can do all of this. But the Israelites listened to the 10 spies. What did they want to do to Joshua and Caleb? Yeah, they wanted to stone them. So it was kind of an interesting moment. You know, it's kind of interesting when you read in Numbers, Moses actually kind of slides out and points specifically at Caleb in particular of the two men. And a lot of people think maybe Caleb was the older of the two. Now, what's kind of weird about our timing here? So Caleb gave us a lot of good information. He said he was 40 years old whenever this happened. Now, how old is he now? How long were they in wilderness? And so how long have they been about conquering? 5 years. A lot of people presume that Caleb and Joshua are the same age, and as I said, some people think maybe Caleb is a little older. But what was the very first thing we read about Joshua? Yeah, he's old. I will say this. A lot of people think maybe this event isn't chronological. And we know that happens a lot, where an event happens and it fits the subject. We're talking about the conquest, but it doesn't fit the chronology. So it's very possible that the chronology isn't here. It's also possible that, Joshua was quite a bit older than we think whenever he first went into the conquest or went into the wilderness, in fact. So it doesn't ever specify. Anybody know how old Joshua was when he died? That's one of our questions. George? 110 years old. So, a lot of times when these chronologies are given like this, they're a little hard to follow, and as I said, it might be because they're not always necessarily in a chronological order. So this could have happened at a different point. Go ahead, Rob.
One of the questions I was going to ask is where will we at in the average lifespan at this time? I know we're in decline.
Yeah.
But they were still living in the hundreds.
Yeah, I got a great answer for you on this one, Rob. So at that time, there was a biblical statement about the age of a man. Anybody know what that was? Well, 120 was what God's very good. God said 120 in Genesis chapter 6. And so that's where he set the boundary. But in this moment, many, many centuries later, God made it. There was another statement made.
I want to say in 70.
So Moses wrote Psalm, I just forgot. Is it Psalm 59? Psalm 69, 79? I just forgot which psalm it was. All right, somebody stumped the chump. Tell us which psalm it was. I think it might have been 79. But when Moses wrote that psalm, Moses said, the years of a man's life are, what did you say, Rob? 70 years, and if by strength, 80. So Moses, in that time, told us that people's life expectancy was 70 to 80 years. So these guys are living extended lives. And they're living these extended lives because of their service to God, not because just everybody lived extended lives back then. These people were unique. And we see a few times in the Bible where somebody had a very long life because of their particular service to God. I always like to point out the high priest Jehoiada in the time of King Jehu, that he was a real important person to live long. George?
It's interesting that we often refer to Ephesians 6, where we may live longer so that came late for Joshua.
That's an interesting point. If you heard what George said, he reminds us in Ephesians 6, verse 1 or verse 2, he said, but honor your father and mother. He says, this is the first command with a promise that you may live long on the earth. And some in the Old Testament that talked about the land, but in the New Testament, the way Paul writes it, it talks about your age. So what I think is interesting is that it seems like these people in their righteous conduct, they had long lives for that reason. So that's a really, really good point. Monique?
It's Psalm 90, verse 10.
Psalm 90. I wasn't even close. Wow. All right. Well, Monique, I'm going to send you that Brian point, okay? Because well done. I wasn't even close. Psalm 90. That's the only psalm written by Moses, but it was Moses in that psalm tells us that a man's years are going to be 70 years if by strength of 80. And that's it. So I appreciate that question, Rob, that we had a Bible answer for. So thanks for asking that. So that longevity is just kind of an interesting thing to think about here. I put it down in Numbers 14:23, and that's just kind of interesting where God seems to almost single out Caleb as being the man that's going to come through this. And it is Caleb and Joshua, but let's get some of that emphasis on Caleb. And I want to jump over to chapter 15 now and say that here we are with, again, the borders being laid out and everything being laid out and how the tribes and the land is being handed out there. But I want to jump to verse 13, a story that you're probably familiar with also from the book of Judges. Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, gave a share among the children of Israel according to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua. And then it goes on in verse 14, Caleb drove the 3 sons of Anak from there. And then verse 15, he went up from there to the inhabitants of Debir. Now verse 16, he says, he who attacks Kirjath Sepher and takes it, to him I will give Akshah, my daughter, as wife. So Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, took it, and he gave Akshah, his daughter, as his wife. Who is Othniel? He's the first judge in the book of Judges. Very good. So he's the first of the judges in that book. I got a couple of thoughts here that strike me. Number one, Caleb in the last chapter was saying, you know what, here I am 85 and I can still, those whippersnappers, he didn't use that word, but I can see him, he just, he's full of strength and vigor, I can go out and do it. And then he says, hey, I need somebody else to attack this hill. What do you think? I think actually there might be a really good reason for that, but what do you think? Well, first of all, this city is special. Well, what I think is really interesting is Caleb's inheritance is special. Caleb's inheritance is special. And Caleb's inheritance is special is because he says, you know what place I want? Who lived in the place he wanted? Well, the word is the Anakim, but who are the Anakim? Giants. By the way, I did a little looking back in history about this. I didn't think I'd have enough time to present it, but it's a really fascinating history about how the ancients viewed giants and such. You know, there's a lot of carvings and Egyptian motifs where they have, and a lot of people today say, well, it was their social status to make them bigger than others. But the way the Egyptians drew them, they said, no, these guys, these masters, these men in ancient times actually were giants. They excavated a gigantic knife in Egypt. I saw a picture of it. They say, well, it had to have been ceremonial because who could have used it? Well, you know, it seems to me that it's very likely that if the Egyptians are saying this, if lots of people are saying this, there were some pretty monstrous people in times past. We have some pretty good accounts of them from ancient things. So here's where these guys live. So when Caleb says, I want that mountain there, what was he picking? Was he looking like, remember Lot looked at the land and says, oh, that land looks really nice, I'll take that. What does Caleb say?
It's the same land he spied out
It's the land he spied out.
and came back with a good
Yeah.
report.
But guess what, Rob? That's the hardest place in Canaan to get. So what I find fascinating is Caleb says, yeah, that's the one I want. You want the hardest place there is to conquer? And Caleb does, by the way. We just saw he drove out the 3 sons of Anak from there. And now he says, okay, next city, whoever gets that gets to marry my daughter. Now, I said a second ago, here Caleb had said he's strong, and I think he just proved it because he just drove off the giants. But he says, whoever does this city, what do you think he might have been thinking?
He's strong in faith, just like he was in faith.
Yeah, well, he is strong in faith. And I might say it like this. You know, maybe George was looking for a son-in-law once. And he's thinking, you know what, I want a son-in-law who is strong in faith. So who's going to take that mountain? I kind of think it might have been, you know, not the idea of, hey, my daughter's a prize to give away, but, hey, I'd like the guy that's the best guy to be the next one. And by the way, Othniel is the guy that then follows in leadership to Israel. So I kind of think maybe it wasn't just I'm just too tired to take this city. I can't help but think maybe Caleb was bringing about a test and thinking, you know what, I'm going to bring about this test, and that's going to be the right guy for my daughter, and you know, ultimately this will be also the guy that's going to take over. So I think there was something very interesting about what happened here and how Caleb thought about this inheritance. What goes on to the rest of chapter 15 there to describe the limits of Judah and how far down Judah goes. So it really does capture a sense of Judah's the great breadth of land that they're going to be taking in. Got a couple of comments online here. Stephen Root says, well, one thing is to train up the next generation as far as why might Caleb have asked somebody else to go. Now, I think that's a good point, too. That what you might be doing here is drawing in others to say, you know what, it's your turn now to train them up. I think that's an important point. Stephen even says, well, maybe it was like just a wink and a nod to Othniel. Maybe he knew the character of Othniel, and he's just trying to set him up in that way. And so again, that really does seem to be a pretty significant point to consider. As I said, I don't see this as Caleb not having the strength to do it. I see this as Caleb trying to be wise about these things. So they drive out most of the people, but at the end of the chapter, who do they fail to drive out? Somebody said it. Say it again, I'll hear it. Jebusites, that's it. So we don't drive the Jebusites out of Jerusalem. Now, by the way, we get also here in this area, we find another name for the city of Jerusalem. What was the other name for the city of Jerusalem at that time? Jebusites were very original to come up with this name. The city of Jebus. So that was the other name for Jerusalem. So when we read back early on in Genesis, we read about the city of Salem. That's Jerusalem. Here it's the city of Jebus. And, you know, we kind of assume that Jerusalem is an amalgamation of those two names that it comes by later. Who actually conquers Jerusalem? Drives these guys out? David. And that's like over 300 years later, nearly 400 years later. So they're going to be there for quite a while. So now it comes to the children of Joseph. Who are the children of Joseph? Chapter 16. Who are the children of Joseph? Ephraim and Manasseh. You know, they get called the half-tribes a lot from the idea that they're, because they're Joseph's sons, they're not necessarily to the full tribes. But you might remember, why was it that these two tribes became full tribes? What happened way back in Egypt when Joseph was even still alive? What happened? You remember? Remember this maneuver? Does that remind you of anything? What happened? So here was Jacob, and when Joseph came in, he was blessing his sons. Now, remember what the blessed inheritance was? What did you get if you were the firstborn son? What did you get? You got the double portion. So, who was the firstborn son? I'm going to sing the song. Reuben. So you say Reuben was. Why didn't Reuben get it? The Bible tells us why. What had he done? They caught him in. Yes, he slept with his father's wife. Now then comes Simeon and Levi, but they didn't get it either. Why not? What had they done? They'd done something that made Jacob's name abhorrent. Yes, the city of Shechem, which, by the way, in just a few minutes we're going to read, is going to be given to them, to those descendants of Levi. Levi, Simeon had lost things too. Now Judah's interesting because Judah gets the promise, the inheritance of the promise, but the double portion goes to Joseph. So instead of going on Joseph, it goes that each of his sons are blessed as though they're equal to the others. So that's where these two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, come from. And that's how we end up with 13 tribes from 12 sons. And those two tribes are the tribes that, as we already talked about Manasseh in one way, that they were the ones on the east side of the river, and then Ephraim's going to be on the west side. And the Ephraimites are going to take their land and get a good sense of their place. I'll show you a map here in just a second to get you a better sense of that. But they're going to get their land delivered to them. We read, for the sake of time, I'll tell you what, I'm going to kind of move a little more quickly. We read briefly about the daughters of Zelophehad, and we remember him back at the end of Numbers. What was the story there? Do you remember their daughters came up, and what was their story to Moses? They said, Moses, we got a problem. What was the problem with the daughters of Zelophehad? I didn't hear you. Inheritance. Their father had died. They didn't have brothers, so they were going to lose their inheritance. So Moses made a particular point to ensure that they would receive that inheritance. And so chapter 17, we read about how that goes on as well. Now, towards the end of chapter 17, we see the people of Ephraim come. Verse 14, the children of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, why have you given us only one lot and one share to inherit, since we are a great people, inasmuch as the Lord has blessed us until now? So what's their complaint? What's the complaint of Ephraim? Hey, there's a lot of us, but what? Yeah, you didn't give us enough land. You didn't have land. Now I said a moment ago, remember, Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim. So, I wonder if there might have been a thought of, Joshua is one of our guys or something like that. But Joshua's answer is very interesting. Joshua says, tell you what, here's the solution. What did he say? Remember? What was his solution there? Did he say, I'm just going to give you the best land somewhere else? What did he say? He says, got a deal for you. Those Perizzites and the giants over here are in this land. It's yours. Now, the Ephraimites kind of step back and they say, wait a second. That isn't going to work. And so we read about how that gets worked out there. Let's stop here. Let's do some questions. Before we get some questions, here's what it would look like. When we look at the land. By the way, these borders are always, every map you're going to look at, they're going to be a little different. Some of that is because we don't know where every city there was located. So a lot of times we're just kind of guessing where the cities were or where a lot of the boundary markers were. But this gives us a great sense of what the land looked like. Now, it's important to get a sense that as we look at this land, one of the things always strikes us, Judah and Simeon are right together. It'll say, in fact, that Simeon's inheritance was in the midst of Judah. Judges chapter 1, they both go together to take the land. You see Reuben and Gad over on this side of the Dead Sea of the Jordan River, and part of Manasseh over on the other side as well. Now Dan is way down here, but Dan's going to do something interesting here, and we're going to get a mention of. They're going to go way up to the top here. And they're going to conquer an area way at the top. So some of your maps will have down here, and then down way up at the top as well, because they're going to go out and take some extra land. Just thought I would point out where Hebron was here that Caleb wanted, and why I just thought that was such an interesting thing to think about and the significance here. All right, let me ask it one more time. How old again was Joshua when he died? George said it before anybody else. 110 years old when he died. So we know that information. One of the things that I thought was interesting was about the characteristic of Caleb getting to conquer the city of Kirjath Sepher. Now, we already talked about this, but who again was that? What's the name one more time? Well, that's who was conquered. I'm sorry, who conquered the Anakim? He was Othniel. He was the first judge. You want to know that. That's worth getting a sense. Caleb's inheritance was Hebron. What kind of things happened at Hebron? Is that a city of any significance? What do you got? George, go ahead. So Abraham built an altar at Hebron. Now, it's kind of interesting. It's called a Hebron there in Genesis, so I find that kind of interesting. But Moses wrote it, so it makes sense. Go ahead. Sarah died at Hebron, and she was buried there as well. So kind of an interesting place. Now, what else do we have, George? I didn't remember that one. I remembered Sarah. I didn't remember Samson bringing gates to Hebron. That's good. What else do we have? Yeah. So Hebron doesn't get a lot of mention beyond that. But one of the things I thought was so interesting was Hebron was a place that was significant for Abraham. So again, I thought that significance really struck me as interesting, where Sarah was buried. Next question. What happened to the Canaanites, and I guess I got to say to some of the Canaanites that weren't driven out of the land or the cities? There might be more than one answer to put on this, but specifically, we're kind of told what happened to some of these Canaanites. You remember what we read? Go ahead, Debbie.
They basically became servants or slaves of the Israelites.
So we're told that a lot of the Canaanites that weren't driven out became the servants of the Israelites. Now, George, we can add something to that. So they were allowed to live. Yeah, allowed to live. Now, you might also say, what happened to some of the other Canaanites? Like the Jebusites, they were Canaanites. Well, some of the Canaanites just were allowed to go on in their lives. In other words, the Israelites didn't drive them out. That's important to set you up for the book of Judges when you find out that those are the thorn in the flesh that's going to cause Israel so much problem, all these Canaanites that weren't driven out. Some of the Canaanites are made slaves. And by the way, that was one of the statements that God had told the Israelites, that when you come into the promised land, you're allowed to negotiate with these cities. If they're willing to submit to you and become your slaves, they'll live. So it does seem that maybe there were some that had done that. When we're talking about the people of Ephraim, and they said they didn't want to take the land, that Joshua was offering them, what was their reasoning? What did they say? We didn't talk about this. What is it that they told Joshua when Joshua said, hey, I've got land for you, go clear out the Perizzites? What was their concern? George? Yes, chariots of iron. Chariots of iron. By the way, that's also something of substance in the book of Judges as well. Chariots of iron were the ICBMs of the ancient world. They were the most modern, terrifying weapon that people had. It's really interesting to read how the Egyptians were the first ones to make these heavy metal chariots, and how they could just trample everybody. They trampled the Hittites a few centuries before this, and now we see here the people of Ephraim saying, you know, those guys, they've got the big weapons. I'll give you a brine point if you can tell me which judge beat a bunch of guys with iron chariots. Anyone? He beat them because he went up a hill, it rained, and the chariots got stuck. Or at least we think that because of the song that got sung afterwards. Deborah and Barak, yeah. They fought the guys in the iron chariots, and they beat them. So it's kind of interesting here, the Ephraimites saying, no, We don't want that. You know, Ephraimites are interesting. They're in the book of Judges. They're the ones that cause a lot of trouble. They're kind of a cantankerous group of folks, it seems like. They have a lot of times a lot of complaints to bring out and frustrations to bring out. So that's kind of interesting. Let's go ahead and jump to chapter 18 now. So chapter 18, we're now coming together as an assembly at Shiloh. Shiloh's kind of an interesting place when you think about the tabernacle there being at Shiloh. Anybody know how long the tabernacle is going to be at Shiloh? This is kind of a stretch your Old Testament knowledge question. So the tabernacle is set up at Shiloh. How long is it going to be there? How long would it be there? I guess enough for a year, maybe just a time frame or a person. There's a famous judge there, and he was priest and judge. He's one of the only priest judges. And somebody said it maybe Samuel. So the time of Eli and then Samuel, the tabernacle is still at Shiloh. Now, by the way, later on, Jeremiah says, hey, don't forget Shiloh. If you think that I'm going to preserve things just because it's a place of worship for me, remember Shiloh. In the time of Eli, Shiloh seemed to have been sacked, and we know the tabernacle, or we know the Ark of the Covenant was taken away. So several centuries, the tabernacle is going to be dwelling at Shiloh. The word Shiloh, you can get a guess what the word means. It's related. It sounds like another word. Give you a hint. It's the same word as our state capital. Peace. Very good. So kind of an interesting, interesting name for this place. So they all come together here, and there remained among the children of Israel 7 tribes which had not yet received their inheritance. Why not? They've been many years about this. Why not? What'd you say? Laziness? Yeah. No, it isn't because they, haven't had the time or opportunity. There's some kind of dragging of the feet here. Joshua says, well, how long will you, uses the word neglect, to go and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers has given you? So he says, what you need to do is pick men, and I'm going to send them, and they're going to survey the land, and we're going to draw it all out. So they go together and they draw up this survey. I think the survey is kind of an interesting thing to consider how they do this. Verse 10, Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord, and there Joshua divided the land to the children of Israel according to their divisions. So we go on to read about Benjamin. By the way, Benjamin's kind of interesting because Benjamin originally is going to include Jerusalem. But over time, Jerusalem becomes a part of the land of Judah. But early on, it would have included Jerusalem. And we go on there and we read about how the people of Simeon, in chapter 19, received their holding. And by the way, Simeon, we saw this in the map before, Simeon was actually inside of Judah. And then finally, after the remainder of the tribes, actually could have gone through all of them, I guess, I would just want to come up and talk about this, that when they're all done, verse 49 of chapter 19, when they had made an end of dividing the land as an inheritance, according to their borders, the children of Israel gave an inheritance among them to Joshua, the son of Nun. According to the word of the Lord, they gave him the city which he had asked for, Timnath-Serah, in the mountains of Ephraim, and there he built a city and dwelt in it. So kind of interesting. Here is the final point of this dispersion of land, and the final dispersion goes to Joshua himself. And so Joshua himself received this. They, verse 51, these were the inheritances which Eleazar the priest, Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of the fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel divided as an inheritance by lot in Shiloh before the Lord at the door of tabernacle of meeting. So they made an end of dividing the country. The division is concluded. I'm going to be careful to say the conquest, you might say concluded, but we're going to have some problems with that as well. So I got a question for you. We just read a moment ago that it said that the way the land was being dispersed was by casting lots. Debbie said earlier, maybe that's like, putting names in a hat or something like that. Is that gambling? Casting lots? Can you think of any New Testament examples? Casting lots?
When they selected the apostle.
When they selected between the apostles, between Barsabas and Matthias. Very good. They cast lots. So what do you think? Think gambling? There's a couple answers to this, by the way. So we'll let Ryan give us something to think about. Yeah. Yeah. Well, first and foremost, when we talk about the problems of gambling, what's the problem? Somebody said ill-gotten gain. So we usually talk about the idea of ill-gotten gain as being the issue of gambling. Now, in this case, they're not, wagering for money or something like that. In fact, a lot of times we talk about gambling, we say gambling is theft by consent. That you're stealing from somebody, even though they've agreed to allow it to happen, it's still a theft. It's still an ill-gotten gain. So we're not always saying gambling or the idea of a chance is wrong. We're saying that the idea of ill-gotten gain is the issue that we're concerned about. But the second question is about gambling. I have a statement here from Stephen James. He says, no, this could not be gambling because it was only used as a determination by God. Who would own what land? Gambling often involves deceiving others to win. So the second thing to think of is when they were doing this, what was the point of this? Well, they were trying to get God to make that selection. And that's kind of the point we seem to see, as Gregor mentioned in the New Testament with the apostles, that we see there as well. That this wasn't a matter where they were leaving things up to chance. In fact, where was it they did this? At Shiloh, right in front of the tabernacle, it said, by the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So the point is that they were actually putting this for the idea of it was God making these determinations and selections. Stephen Root adds the comment online. He says, well, intentions are key. And I would say that the point here is that their intention was to let God make that choice. I have another comment here from Grant Haynes. He says, casting lots in this case is a way to ensure the land is distributed without bias. And that's a good comment because, we saw a moment ago, and the Ephraimites weren't happy with their land. They went to Joshua. He's an Ephraimite. So what happened? I think Joshua's answer was great to say, well, take that land there. It wasn't land necessarily anybody wanted. Let's go Caleb. Caleb might have wanted, some more giants. I'll go get them, I think. But the point was that was a very judicious way to handle it. But Grant goes on to say, otherwise, someone may accuse Joshua of favoritism. And I could see that being a very real thing to be concerned about. Why did the tribe of Simeon share their territory with Judah? Maybe there's an easy answer to this, or maybe there's a complicated answer to this. It does kind of tell us something straightforward about this, if you saw it. Why did the tribe of Simeon share their territory with Judah? Why did they do that? Monique?
It says that Judah's land was too much for them. The share of the son of Judah was too large for them. So Simeon shared with them.
So specifically here in Joshua, it directly tells us that Judah's land was too much. And I wonder about that because I think, well, God apportioned it, so how could it be too much? Now, I will say, when you look at the map, you see that Judah had a big chunk of land down there, and Simeon kind of moves into that. Now, I might add to that some of the issue is that in Judges chapter 1, we see Simeon and Judah team up to go finish their conquest too. So part of the idea there is that they probably were in some ways working together a lot closer union than some of the tribes had as well, and that might be something to consider. Last statement, what did the tribe of Dan do or receive that was not a part of their inheritance? It's just mentioned briefly. We talked about it briefly. What did they do? They took the city of Lachish, which is way up in the north. Now, I'll be honest, I've wondered for many years, and I still don't know what the answer is, was that something that was right or wrong? In other words, it wasn't part of their inheritance, but they just said, well, hey, how about we go all the way to the other side of the nation of Israel and take some land up there? And all I can say is that place later on gets a bad reputation, that city. Did anybody know why the city of Dan gets a bad reputation a little further on? What happens there? In fact, it's so bad that a lot of times, like in the New Testament, you don't even read about the tribe of Dan. In some of the lists of tribes in the book of Revelation, a lot of people identified this why. What did they do at Dan? What did they set up at Dan? Yes, they set up the calves that became the stumbling block of Israel. So maybe there's a sense there where what they did wasn't necessarily something that God wanted them to do. So that's an important point to consider. We're at the end of our time. One of the things I just want to wrap up with is to make a point to say God is going to do everything he said he would do, but Israel is not going to do everything they were supposed to do. Not a shock. I mean, we've gotten used to Israel at this point and them not fulfilling the things that they were supposed to do. But as we kind of finish up all this conquest, again, here at the very end, they're still getting pushed. You got to get out there, guys. You got to get your land. You got to move in. And even then, they're going to leave a lot of little Canaanite cities and dwellings. And those things are going to cause them great consternation in the end. So we will stop here. Thanks for great comments and thoughts this evening. I appreciate that. And we'll pick up next week.